Okay, I want to bring you some of what the Trump administration's highest-ranking officials have been saying. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the U.S. stands ready to lead and make Gaza beautiful again. He also says America is pursuing lasting peace in the region for all people. U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, says Gaza is uninhabitable and will probably be uninhabitable for at least the next 10 to 15 years. That's how much work needs to be done. Bobby McDonough is a former Irish ambassador to the UK, Italy and the EU. He's joining us live from Dublin. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. Ireland has recognised Palestine as a state in its own right. What's your interpretation of the way that things are happening over the last 24 hours and the statements that have been coming out?
Well, I don't speak for the Irish government, but the Irish Foreign Minister has already made clear this morning Ireland's position on Trump's plan, which is that we stand with international law, Security Council resolutions, and the need for a two-state solution. And that position is supported by, I would say, nearly 100% of Irish people, because in this country, given our long and difficult history with our nearest neighbour, we still retain an understanding of dispossession and the importance of land. And the fact that Trump talks about Gaza as real estate shows, I think, that his understanding of human motivation and of history is nil. But I think that there has to be an element of wait and see here, because Trump doesn't always follow up on his threats. He largely backed down on Canada, largely backed down on Mexico, Panama. And so he has this deliberate policy, as we know, it's a stated policy of some of his advisors, of coming out with so many shocking things that it's almost impossible to focus on any of them. But at the same time, even though we need to wait and see what actually happens, it shows that there's a moral vacuum in the White House. He talks about making America great again, and yet he's relentlessly diminishing the standing of the United States in the world. And incidentally, also opening up some of the moral high ground for China, the great rival of the United States, which came out with a perfectly reasonable statement this morning about the situation in Gaza. The core issue remains, and it's so obvious that maybe it doesn't need to be said, but it's about equal rights for the Israelis and the Palestinians. And the Palestinians have as much right to Gaza and the West Bank as the Israelis have to their own country. And Israel has zero legal, moral, historical, biblical rights to Palestinian land, and likewise the United States. So in moral terms, for the United States to say that the Palestinians should get out of their own land so that Israeli and US settlers can move in is actually the moral equivalent of saying that United States citizens should get out of the United States so that Mexican migrants can take over. Of course, that won't happen, but I'm just mentioning it because of the moral equivalence of it. And of course, in the real world today, negotiations have started on the second phase of the ceasefire, which is really important. So I hope, for the sake of the remaining Israeli hostages and for the very long suffering Palestinian civilians, that Trump's play acting in the last 24 hours doesn't disrupt that.
I want to ask you, I mean, you use the phrase play acting there. Now, in the course of the world's awareness of Donald Trump as a politician, we have become used to him making off-the-cuff remarks, off-script remarks that have had ramifications around the world until they are essentially dismantled, so often by Trump himself, saying that he was misinterpreted. Yet we now have an administration which appears to be, from the Secretary of State point of view and from the US Special Envoy to the Middle East, reiterating the statements that Donald Trump is making. How much of this does this move from possibly a bidding war, if you like, a deal-making attempt by Donald Trump, to actual policy if it is being backed up by members of the administration?
Well, it's very hard to know which of his threats he will follow up on. But certainly, you know, he promised tariffs on Canada and Mexico during the election campaign many times, and he's backed down. He said he would take over Panama. He's backed down. He says he will take over Greenland, and I doubt that he will. But at the same time, the statement that he made last night is of profound significance. And I think there are two things. One is, to what extent does he really intend to follow up? But the other is the pushback that he's going to get. He's got pushback from most of the countries in the world, and most people in the world can see that what he's proposing is clearly wrong. And a priority of Israel is to normalise relations with Saudi Arabia and other Arab countries, and that absolutely will not happen in these circumstances, and that's been made clear. So the pushback will come from others, and of course, as I say, Trump doesn't necessarily always follow up on his threats, but he talks about a
Bobby
Riviera.
McDonough, please forgive me for interrupting. I'm kind of conscious that we're up against the clock, but we are very grateful to you for being with us on Al Jazeera, so thank you very much indeed.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.